The confrontation in the skies over the Mediterranean did not emerge from aggression in the cockpit, but from a dispute drawn on maps and argued in legal language. For Libya, the Gulf of Sidra was sovereign territory and extension of its coastline, protected by national authority. For the United States, it was something very different. International waters, governed by long-standing maritime law and the principle of freedom of navigation. This disagreement was not new. For years, Washington had rejected Libya's claim as excessive and unlawful. In response, the United States Navy adopted a deliberate strategy, sail and fly through the contested area, openly and repeatedly, to challenge the claim without firing a shot. It was a test not only of law, but of resolve. In August 1981, that test took physical form. An American carrier battle group moved into the region, its presence unmistakable. Fighter jets launched in waves, patrolling the skies above the disputed waters. The message was clear. The United States would not recognize unilateral claims enforced by intimidation. The first day unfolded almost casually. Libyan aircraft scrambled repeatedly, probing the American patrols. Each time,
you are intercepted.
Fighters intercepted them, maneuvering into dominant positions that left no doubt about the outcome of any potential fight. 70 Libyan aircraft were turned away without a single missile fired. To the Americans, it felt less like combat, and more like controlled theater.
The weather over the target area is holding steady at 10,000 feet.
Experience and superior technology reinforced a sense of control. Intercepts were executed cleanly. Communications were calm. One American commander would later describe the day as all fun and games, a telling phrase that revealed just how distant real danger seemed in that moment. Yet beneath the surface, the situation was far from stable. Libyan pilots were operating under immense political pressure, tasked with defending what their government had declared national waters. Every interception was not merely a tactical encounter, but a symbolic challenge to national sovereignty. The margin for miscalculation narrowed with each pass. As dawn broke the following morning, 2 American F-14 seconds lifted into the air for another routine patrol. Nothing about the mission suggested escalation. The sky was clear. Procedures were familiar. But history often turns not on intentions, but on moments when confidence collides with fear, and restraint gives way to reflex. What had been a measured demonstration of power was about to become something else entirely. Shortly after sunrise, the routine returned, or so it seemed.
Confirming checkpoint whiskey over Sidra. Situation normal.
102 and 107
Roger that.
high above the contested waters of the Gulf of Sidra. The mission parameters were unchanged. Identify contacts, intercept if necessary, avoid escalation. For seasoned crews flying the F-14 Tomcat, it was a familiar rhythm. An unidentified radar contact soon appeared, heading directly toward them. There was no urgency in the cockpit. The previous day's encounters had reinforced a sense of predictability. Libyan aircraft would approach, posture, and then disengage. Calmly, the lead pilot reported the contact and maneuvered to intercept, with his wingman widening the formation as doctrine required. Visual contact came quickly. 2 Libyan Su-22 flew wingtip to wingtip, closing the distance head-on. It was an aggressive posture, but not unprecedented. At that exact moment, the wingman's radar malfunctioned, erasing the electronic picture. Training took over. He continued visually, trusting his eyes and instincts. Then the situation shattered. A sudden orange flash erupted beneath one of the Libyan jets, followed by a thin smoke trail racing forward. There was no ambiguity. A missile had been fired. In the span of a heartbeat, the encounter transformed from interception to combat. The American lead reacted instantly, hauling his aircraft into a hard defensive turn. The missile streaked past, missing by seconds, as the Libyan fighters roared by. Over the radio came the words no pilot ever expects to say in peacetime operations. They had been fired upon. Orders followed just as fast. The wingman was directed to pursue the attacker. Both American jets reversed course, engines at full power, acceleration pressing them deep into their seats. The sky, moments earlier calm and predictable, became a three-dimensional battlefield of converging vectors and split-second decisions. The Libyan pilots broke formation, each fleeing in a different direction. The chase was on. One American pilot selected his heat-seeking missile and squeezed the trigger, only to be met with a warning tone. The weapon failed. There was no time for frustration, no margin for hesitation. Meanwhile, the second American fighter closed rapidly on the remaining target. As the Libyan jet turned toward the rising sun, another decision had to be made. Firing too early risked the missile locking onto the sun's heat instead of the engine exhaust. 10 seconds passed an eternity at combat speed before the target turned again. That was all it took. The missile leapt from the wing and flew true. In moments, it struck home, tearing into the aircraft's engine and sending burning debris spiraling toward the sea. The first aircraft was down. The second fight was still unfolding. What had begun as a patrol had now crossed the point of no return. The sky ahead was suddenly filled with smoke and falling metal. For a brief moment, no one knew which aircraft had been hit. In aerial combat, certainty often arrives seconds late, carried not by sight, but by radio calls and the absence of a friendly voice. Inside the second American fighter, the crew watched the distant column of black smoke plunge toward the sea. Adrenaline surged, followed immediately by dread. At that altitude and speed, there was no time to reflect, only to act. The remaining Libyan aircraft was still ahead, still fast, still a potential threat. The order came without hesitation. This time, the decision carried weight beyond tactics. The request to fire was not born of aggression, but necessity. Once missiles had been exchanged, restraint alone could no longer guarantee survival. The American pilot squeezed the trigger again. The missile appeared to fail, flying straight ahead, seemingly blind, drifting out of view. For a split second, it felt like history repeating itself. Another malfunction, another narrowing margin. With no time left to troubleshoot, the pilot switched to guns, preparing for a close-range engagement that would demand absolute precision. Then the impossible happened. The missile reappeared in the pilot's peripheral vision, arcing back with lethal intent. It slammed into the fleeing aircraft, detonating in a burst of fire and debris. Shrapnel filled the air ahead. The American jet yanked violently upward, pulling crushing forces as it barely escaped the expanding cloud of wreckage. Silence followed, broken only by heavy breathing and instrument warnings slowly fading back to normal. The fight was over. Both enemy aircraft were down. Both Libyan pilots ejected and survived, later recovered from the sea by rescue helicopters. That fact mattered. It transformed the engagement from a tragedy into a narrowly contained clash, one that would not demand funerals or fuel immediate retaliation. Only after the engagement ended did clearance arrive from command, permission to defend themselves. The delay was telling. It revealed how carefully every move had been weighed, how desperately leaders sought to avoid escalation, even as events moved faster than authorization could travel. Aboard the carrier, the pilots were greeted with quiet recognition rather than celebration. There were no medals, no public announcements, no victory speeches. The message was implicit. This was not a triumph to be advertised, but an incident to be contained. Strategically, little changed on paper. Politically, relations worsened but did not collapse. Militarily, however, the lesson was unmistakable. In contested spaces, even the most controlled demonstrations of power can unravel without warning. 2 aircraft had fallen into the sea. The war had not followed. History would remember the day not for what it unleashed, but for how close it came. From a tactical standpoint, the encounter lasted only minutes. From a strategic perspective, its implications stretched far beyond the falling wreckage. What unfolded over the Mediterranean was not merely an air-to-air engagement, it was a real-time stress test of Cold War restraint. For American leadership, the priority was never victory in the traditional sense. The operation had been designed to assert a principle, not provoke a conflict. Freedom of navigation was the objective, not escalation. Yet the delay in authorization, permission to defend arriving only after the fight had ended, revealed how carefully Washington had attempted to manage every variable. Commanders understood that a single misstep could spiral into a broader confrontation neither side truly wanted. The political climate amplified that caution. Under Ronald Reagan, the United States projected renewed confidence abroad, but that confidence was paired with an acute awareness of global consequences. Any clash with Libya risked entanglement with wider Cold War dynamics, drawing in allies, rivals, and international institutions. Restraint was not weakness, it was strategy. Libya, for its part, faced a different reality. The loss of 2 aircraft exposed the limits of symbolic claims enforced by force. While the pilots survived, the incident underscored how quickly political declarations could place individual air crews in mortal danger. Domestically, the encounter hardened rhetoric but offered little room for retaliation without inviting disaster. Internationally, the reaction was muted. There were no emergency summits, no sweeping sanctions, no dramatic shifts in alliance structures. That silence was telling. The world had witnessed a confrontation that could have ignited a regional crisis, yet ended with measured restraint on both sides. Stability, fragile as it was, held. Within military circles, however, the lessons were immediate and enduring. Rules of engagement were scrutinized. Intercept procedures were refined. The incident became a case study in how technological superiority, discipline, and split-second judgment could prevent escalation even after the first shot was fired. Culturally, the encounter would later echo far beyond briefing rooms. Elements of the fight, its tension, its precision, its restraint found their way into popular imagination, shaping how generations would visualize modern air combat. The engagement over the Gulf of Sidra did not redefine global politics.
How long before they move, General?
But it clarified something essential. In contested spaces, power must be balanced by judgment, and survival often depends less on intent than on control. When the engines powered down and the deck crews signaled recovery, the moment passed without ceremony. No victory banners were raised. No speeches were made. What had occurred over the Mediterranean was never meant to be remembered as a triumph, only as an outcome narrowly controlled. In the years that followed, the engagement over the Gulf of Sidra faded from headlines, overshadowed by larger conflicts and louder crises. Yet within military history, its significance endured. It became a reminder that modern warfare is often decided not by grand offensives, but by seconds of judgment under pressure. The pilots involved did not act as conquerors. They acted as professionals, navigating an encounter where hesitation could have been fatal and excess could have been catastrophic. The aircraft itself carried part of that legacy. The F-14, known as Fast Eagle 102, once a tool of deterrence and survival, was eventually preserved not as a symbol of dominance, but as a witness to restraint. Today, it stands quietly at the Midland Army Airfield Museum, allowing visitors to walk past its wings and reflect on a moment when history could have tipped in a far darker direction. For the broader world,
The cost of victory is rarely
the
measured in
lesson
steel,
was subtle
but in the silence
but
that follows the
enduring.
guns.
Power alone does not prevent war. Technology alone does not guarantee control. What matters most is the discipline to stop when stopping is still possible. On that August morning,
Only
2
silence.
aircraft were lost, but
Keep
a
your eyes
larger
open, this ground
conflict
still
was
feels heavy.
avoided. That outcome was no accident. It was the product of training, restraint, and an understanding that some victories are measured not in wreckage, but in what never happens next. The pilots returned home without medals, but with something far heavier, the knowledge of how close the world had come to something irreversible. And that raises a final question worth asking even now. In moments of crisis, do we still value judgment over impulse and restraint over pride? If this story made you reflect on the thin line between peace and war, share your thoughts below. And if you value the lessons history leaves behind, consider joining us as we continue exploring the moments that quietly shape the world we live in.